The rope burned against Cordelia's neck as the crowd below bayed for her blood. Right. Their voices a cacophony of hatred that echoed off the weathered buildings of Millhaven. Her bound hands trembled behind her back, not from fear of death, but from the injustice of it all. She hadn't killed Mayor Wickham. She'd only been trying to stop him from forcing himself on young patients at the boarding house. Any last words? Which? Sheriff Bramwell spat, his tobacco-stained teeth gleaming in the afternoon sun. Cordelia lifted her chin, scanning the jeering faces until her eyes found the one person who'd shown her kindness in this god-forsaken town. Kestrel Thorne stood at the back of the crowd, his weathered hat pulled low, those storm-gray eyes she'd grown to love burning with barely contained fury. The drifter who'd ridden into town 3 months ago had captured her heart with his gentle ways and poetry recited under starlight. "I regret nothing," she declared, her voice carrying over the mob's roar. The hangman reached for the lever, but a gunshot cracked through the air. The crowd scattered like startled sheep as Kestrel's Colt .45 smoked in his hand. "Cut her down, Bramwell, or I'll put a hole through that yellow belly of yours." The sheriff's hand moved toward his weapon, but 3 more shots rang. Out Kestrel's aim, true enough to part the sheriff's hair without drawing blood. Bramwell's knees buckled, and he collapsed in a puddle of his own making. The rope, now. Kestrel's voice thundered with the authority of a man who'd seen too much death to stomach. One more innocent lost? The hangman's shaking hands fumbled with the noose as Kestrel mounted the scaffold in 3 swift strides. His calloused fingers worked the knots with the efficiency of someone who knew his way around rope and rigging. "Cordelia," he whispered, his voice breaking as he caught her falling form. "I thought I was too late," she gasped, feeling the circulation return to her hands as he cut her bonds. "You came back? I thought when you left yesterday I went to get proof." He pressed a worn leather journal into her hands. Wickham's own confession. Been blackmailing half the town, forcing himself on the women who were just the first brave enough to fight back. Around them, the crowd began to murmur as word spread through the square. Kestrel had ridden hard to the county seat, broken into the mayor's private office, and found evidence that would hang Wickham if he weren't already dead by Cordelia's hand in self-defense. "They'll still come for us," she whispered against his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and sage that clung to his shirt. "Let them try." His arms tightened around her. "I've been running my whole life, Cordelia, from the war, from my demons, from love. But I won't run from this. Won't run from you." Sheriff Bramwell struggled to his feet, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "This ain't over, Drifter. Can't save her from what she'd done." Kestrel's smile was cold as winter wind. "Watch me." By sunset, word had spread through Millhaven, like wildfire through dry grass. The evidence in Wickham's journal painted a picture so vile that even his staunchest supporters began to question their righteous anger. Cordelia sat in the old church where Father Matthias had given them sanctuary, her fingers tracing the pages that had saved her life. "Listen to this," she read aloud to Kestrel, who kept watch at the window. "Young Mercy pleaded with me, but I reminded her of her father's gambling debts. She submitted, as they all do, in the end." Her voice cracked. "Mercy took her own life last spring. We all thought it was the fever that made her so melancholy." Kestrel's jaw tightened. Wickham was a monster. "You did this town a service even if they're too blind to see it." The church door creaked open, and they both tensed until they saw it was Dr. Holloway, his medical bag in hand, and his face grave with purpose. Behind him came 3 more figures patients from the boarding house. Old Mrs. Clearwater, who ran the general store, and surprisingly, Judge Aldrich himself. "Miss Cordelia," the judge said, removing his hat, "I owe you an apology." "We all do, Your Honor." Cordelia rose, uncertain. "I've spent the evening reading that journal, cross-referencing it with certain complaints that came to my attention over the years. Complaints I'm ashamed to say I dismissed." The judge's weathered face showed every one of his 60 years. "The evidence is clear. You acted in defense, not just of yourself, but of every woman in this town." Patience stepped forward, her young face streaked with tears. "I never got to thank you proper, Miss Cordelia. When you came into that room and saw what he was doing to me, I thought I was going to die. No woman should face such evil alone, Mrs. Clearwater added, her usual stern demeanor softened by emotion. My own granddaughter, if she'd had someone. Like you when Wickham cornered her behind the church last Christmas. Dr. Holloway set down his bag and pulled out an official-looking document. I've examined the body thoroughly. Mayor Wickham died from a single stab wound to the heart, delivered at close range during what was clearly a struggle. The defensive wounds on his hands and the tears in Miss Cordelia's dress support her account entirely. Judge Aldrich nodded solemnly. By the authority vested in me by the territorial government, I hereby dismiss all charges against Cordelia Ashworth. Furthermore, I'm issuing a warrant for Sheriff Bramwell's arrest on charges of corruption and conspiracy. Kestrel moved from the window to Cordelia's side. What about the town? Half of them were ready to string her up this afternoon. Fear makes people cruel, the judge replied. But truth has a way of cutting through fear, given time. There will be a town meeting tomorrow. The evidence will be presented publicly. As the others prepared to leave, patience lingered. Miss Cordelia, there's something else you should know. Bramwell's been in Wickham's pocket for years. He knew what was happening to us girls, and he looked the other way. Some say he even participated. Kestrel's hand moved instinctively too. His gun? Where is he now? Holed up in the jail with his deputies, Dr. Holloway answered. But his support is crumbling. Half his men have already abandoned him. After the others left, Cordelia and Kestrel sat together in the pew, where they'd first talked about their dreams of a life beyond the endless prairie. The candlelight flickered across their faces as she leaned against his shoulder. I keep thinking about what you said about running your whole life. And now I'm asking you to run with me, he said softly. After tomorrow, after you're cleared, we could head west. California, maybe. Start fresh, where nobody knows our names. She was quiet. For a long moment, what if I don't want to run anymore either? The town meeting the next evening drew every soul in Millhaven to the church. The small building packed beyond capacity with folks standing in the aisles and crowding around the open windows. Judge Aldrich presided from the pulpit while Cordelia sat in the front pew, Kestrel's reassuring presence beside her. Before we begin, the judge announced, I want it known that any man who speaks out of turn or shows disrespect will answer to me personally. The crowd murmured its acknowledgement as Bramwell was led in wearing shackles, his face sullen and defiant. His remaining deputy, a young man named Curtis, had agreed to testify in exchange for clemency. Deputy Curtis, Judge Aldrich called, tell us what you witnessed in Mayor Wickham's office. Curtis stood on shaking legs, Your Honor. I saw the mayor with my own eyes, forcing himself on Mary Hutchins. When I tried to intervene, Sheriff Bramwell held me back, said it was the mayor's right and that Mary's husband owed money to the bank. A gasp rippled through the congregation. Mary Hutchins, seated near the back, buried her face in her hands as her husband's arm encircled her protectively. And what did Sheriff Bramwell say about these arrangements? He said it was just the way of things. That powerful men take what they want, and it's not our place to question it. Curtis's voice grew stronger. But when Miss Cordelia fought back, the sheriff got scared. Said she had to hang to keep the other women in line. The crowd's murmur grew louder, angrier. Bramwell rose to his feet despite his chains. That's a lie. I was upholding the law. Sit down, Judge Aldrich commanded. You'll have your chance to speak when you're on trial. Dr. Holloway presented his medical evidence next, followed by testimony from Mrs. Clearwater about suspicious injuries she'd noticed on various young women over the past 2 years. Each revelation painted a darker picture of the corruption that had festered in their small community. Finally, Cordelia was called to speak. She rose slowly, her heart pounding as she faced the very people who'd been calling for her death just days before. I didn't set out to be a hero, she began, her clear voice carrying to the back of the church. I just couldn't stand by and watch. Evil happened when I had the power to stop it. Patience is barely 17 years old. She came to this town looking for honest work, and instead, she found a predator who thought his position made him untouchable. She paused, gathering her courage. How many of you knew? How many of you suspected what Mayor Wickham was doing to our daughters, our sisters, our wives, and chose to look the other way because it was easier than confronting an uncomfortable truth. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, old Henrik the blacksmith stood up. "I knew," he said, his voice thick with shame. "My youngest girl came home crying one night. Wouldn't say why. But I saw the bruises on her wrists. I should have protected her." One by one, other men began to stand. Merchants, farmers, laborers, admitting their complicity through silence. The women wept openly, some for the first time able to acknowledge publicly what they'd endured. "Miss Cordelia saved us all," declared Mrs. Patterson, the school teacher. "She did what we were all too frightened to do." Reverend Cross, who had remained notably silent during the hanging attempt, finally spoke. "The good book tells us that the truth shall set us free. Cordelia's courage has freed us from a terrible lie we've been living." As the meeting concluded, Judge Aldrich made his final pronouncement. "Cordelia Ashworth is hereby declared a hero of this community. Furthermore, I'm recommending her for territorial recognition for her bravery in exposing this corruption." But as the crowd dispersed, Kestrel noticed several men slipping out the back of the church, their faces hard with resentment. The fight wasn't over yet. 3 nights after the town meeting, Kestrel's instincts proved correct. He woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the sound of angry voices outside the boarding house where he and Cordelia had taken refuge. Through the window, he saw torches bobbing in the darkness, a lynch mob of Wickham's remaining supporters, led by his brother Silas, who'd ridden in from the county seat. "Cordelia, wake up." He shook her gently but urgently. "You need to go now." She came awake instantly, the survival skills learned from months of persecution serving her well. "How many? Dozen? Maybe more? They've got the front and back exits covered." Outside, Silas Wickham's voice boomed across the night air. "Send out the murderer and the drifter, and no one else needs to get hurt." Mrs. Abernathy, the boarding house proprietor, appeared in their doorway wearing her nightgown and carrying an old shotgun. "There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen. Connects to a tunnel that comes out by the creek." "I can't ask you to," Cordelia began. "Child, after what that monster did to my sister 30 years ago, you're a saint in my eyes." The older woman's face was steel. "Now go before they get brave enough to come inside." They gathered their few belongings and crept downstairs as the mob's chanting grew louder. The root cellar was cramped and musty, filled with preserved vegetables and the scent of earth. The tunnel was barely wide enough for Kestrel's shoulders, but it led true to the creek bank where they emerged gasping into the cool night air. "Horses stabled at Jameson's," Kestrel whispered. "If we can reach." A gunshot cracked behind them, followed by Mrs. Abernathy's scream. Orange light flickered across the water as flames began to consume the boarding house. "Are burning." Cordelia breathed, horror in her voice. "Because of us." Kestrel's face went hard as granite. "No, because they're cowards who'd rather destroy than face the truth." They made their way through the shadows toward the livery stable, but found it already surrounded. Silas had been thorough. Every escape route was blocked, every ally intimidated into silence. The mob had swollen to nearly 30 men, many of them strangers who'd ridden in from neighboring towns at Silas's call for vengeance. "What now?" Cordelia asked as they crouched behind a water trough. "Now we make our stand." Kestrel checked his ammunition, enough for a good fight, but not enough to win against such numbers. "I won't let them take you, Cordelia. I promise you." "That—" She gripped his hand. "If this is how it ends, I'm glad I'm with you." But as they prepared for what seemed like a hopeless battle, unexpected allies emerged from the darkness. Judge Aldrich appeared first, carrying a rifle and wearing his old cavalry uniform. Behind him came Dr. Holloway, Henrik the blacksmith, Reverend Cross, and a dozen other men, the ones who'd found their courage at the town meeting. "Thought you might need some help," the judge said quietly. "This isn't your fight," Kestrel replied, though relief flooded his voice. "The hell it isn't." Henrik spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "That woman saved my daughter. Time we returned the favor." The two groups faced each other across the main street of Millhaven, torches and lanterns casting dancing shadows on the wooden storefronts. Silas Wickham stepped forward, his face twisted with grief and rage. "My brother was a good man, a pillar of this community, and you let his killer walk free. Your brother was a rapist and a blackmailer, Judge Aldrich replied calmly. I have the evidence to prove it. Lies, all lies to protect that murderous witch. The tension stretched taut as both sides raised their weapons. Cordelia stepped out. From behind the water trough, her chin raised in defiance. If you want me, Silas Wickham, here I am. Leave these good people out of it. Cordelia, no, Kestrel hissed, but she was already walking toward the center of the street. You want justice for your brother? She called out. Then let God be the judge. A trial by combat? Silas Wickham's laugh was harsh and mocking. You'd face me with weapons, girl? Not with weapons, Cordelia replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. With truth? Give me 1 hour to present my case to these men you've brought from other towns. If I can't convince them of your brother's crimes, I'll come with you willingly. The stranger reinforcements shifted uncomfortably. They'd ridden hard on Silas's word alone, promised easy justice against a murderer. But faced with the calm dignity of the accused woman, some began to question what they'd gotten themselves into. 1 hour, Judge Aldrich agreed before Silas could object. The church, with proper testimony and evidence. This is ridiculous. Silas snarled. She killed my brother. What more evidence do you need? The evidence of why, said a voice from the crowd. To everyone's surprise, it was Sheriff Bramwell, flanked by Deputy Curtis. The disgraced lawman had been brought from his cell, still in shackles, but somehow commanding attention. You want to hear about evidence, Silas? Bramwell's voice was bitter. I've got plenty. Your brother kept detailed records of every woman he violated, every family he blackmailed. Kept them like trophies. Silas's face went white. You're lying to save your own skin? My skin's already lost, boy. But I won't let your brother's memory be whitewashed. Bramwell turned to address the crowd. I was corrupt, I'll admit that. Took money to look the other way. But I never touched those women myself. That was all your precious brother. The crowd moved as one toward the church, drawn by the promise of truth. Inside, by lamplight and with the weight of the cross above them, the full scope of Marcus Wickham's depravity was laid bare. The journal entries were read aloud, each one more damning than the last. Witnesses came forward, women who'd been too frightened to speak before, but who found courage in numbers. Martha Crane, the bank president's daughter, testified about being cornered in her father's office. He said Papa owed him favors, political favors, that I was payment. When I refused, he threatened to ruin our family. Young Timothy Fletcher, barely 18, spoke in a breaking voice about finding his sister Anna behind the schoolhouse, her dress torn and her spirit shattered. She made me promise not to tell, said it would only make things worse for our family. By one, the stories poured out. A pattern of predation and abuse that had lasted for years, enabled by fear and protected by corruption. Even some of Silas's own men began to lower their weapons, horrified by the revelations. But it was Cordelia's own testimony that broke the final barrier of disbelief. I went to that room because I heard screaming, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the church. Patience was begging him to stop, and he was. He was enjoying her fear. When he saw me, he didn't even stop, just smiled and said, I could wait my turn. She paused, her hands trembling slightly. I told him to let her go. He laughed and said no one would believe a whore's word against a mayor's. That's when he came at me with his hands around my throat. Had one chance. One moment when he was off balance, and I took it, not because I wanted to kill, but because I wanted to live. The church fell silent, except for the sound of quiet weeping. Finally, one of Silas's hired men spoke up. I came here thinking to help a grieving brother get justice for his murdered kin. But this... He shook his head. This ain't justice. This is cover-up for a monster. Others nodded agreement, and slowly, man by man, Silas's support crumbled away. Some slipped out of the church entirely, unwilling to be associated with the cause they'd ridden to support. Silas stood alone at the back of the church, his face a mask of anguish and rage. He was still my brother, he whispered. Blood is blood.
Ow.
Blood doesn't excuse evil, Kestrel said quietly. I learned that the hard way during the war. Good men can do terrible things, and terrible men can wear good masks. Your brother wore his mask well. Judge Aldrich stood. Silas Wickham, you have heard the evidence. What say you now? For a long moment, Silas struggled with the truth that had been laid before him. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged in defeat. I say I've been a fool. Blinded by grief and family loyalty. He looked at Cordelia with something approaching respect. You did what you had to do, miss. I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused. As dawn broke over Millhaven, the town seemed transformed. The truth had worked like a purifying fire, burning away years of shame and secrets. Cordelia stood on the front porch of Judge Aldrich's house, watching the sunrise paint the prairie grass gold. Feeling truly free for the first time in months, Kestrel emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee, his face peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. Judge says the territorial governor wants to meet you. There's talk of appointing you as the first female marshal in the territory. A marshal? Cordelia laughed, accepting the warm cup gratefully. 6 months ago, I was just trying to keep body and soul together washing dishes at the boarding house. Mrs. Abernathy's already talking about rebuilding, by the way. Says she wants you to have a permanent room free of charge. He settled beside her on the porch swing. Half the town's been by this morning with apologies and offers of help. It was true. As word had spread of the night's revelations, Millhaven's citizens had come forward with remarkable generosity. The general store owner had offered Cordelia credit for any supplies she needed. The banker had apologized profusely for his previous coldness and hinted at a reward for exposing the corruption. Even Reverend Cross had stopped by to personally bless her actions and ask her to consider teaching Sunday school to the older girls. What do you think? She asked, leaning against Kestrel's shoulder. Could you see yourself settling down in a place like this? Depends. Are you planning to stay? Before she could answer, they heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A rider was coming hard down the main street, a young woman in men's clothes, her horse lathered with sweat. She pulled up at the judge's gate and dismounted with practiced ease. Are you Cordelia Ashworth? She called out. I am, the stranger strode up the walkway, her movements purposeful and confident. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with auburn hair braided down her back and intelligent green eyes that missed nothing. Name's Temperance Whitmore. I rode over from Cedar Falls when I heard what happened here. She pulled a folded newspaper from her saddlebag. Been reading about your case in the territorial papers. Quite a story. Cordelia took the paper and gasped. The headline read, Woman Hero Exposes Corruption in Millhaven with a Detailed Account of the Previous Night's Events. News travels fast out here, Temperance continued. It's got other women thinking. There's problems in Cedar Falls. 2. Similar problems, if you catch my meaning. Kestrel straightened. You're saying there are others like Wickham? I'm saying Wickham wasn't unique. So there's a whole network of these devils protected by each other and by men too cowardly to stand. Up to them, Temperance's eyes blazed with righteous anger. But your example here has given women hope. Shown them that predators can be stopped if you have the courage to act. Judge Aldrich appeared in the doorway, drawn by the conversation. Miss Whitmore, isn't it? I've heard of you. The lady who's been writing those articles about women's rights in the territorial papers? Guilty as charged, Your Honor, and I'd like to propose something to Miss Ashworth. Temperance turned back to Cordelia. Your fight beyond Millhaven. There are women across 3 territories who could use someone like you, someone who's proven that these monsters can be brought down. The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Cordelia felt her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and fear. The quiet life she dreamed of seemed to be slipping away, replaced by something larger and more dangerous. I'd need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, but don't think too long. There's a girl in Cedar Falls, barely 16, who's been missing for 2 weeks. Her family thinks she ran off with a traveling salesman, but I know better. The mayor there has the same look in his eyes that folks say your Marcus Wickham had. That afternoon, as Temperance rested her horse and shared more details of the corruption plaguing neighboring communities, Cordelia found herself torn between conflicting desires. Part of her longed for the peace and respectability that staying in Millhaven would bring. But another part, the part that had driven her, that night in Patience's defense, burned with the need to help others who couldn't help themselves. Thinking about going with her, Kestrel observed as they walked along the creek where they'd first kissed. "Am I that obvious? To me you are?" He stopped and turned to face her. "The question is, are you thinking about going alone?" 3 weeks later, Cordelia stood before her mirror in the rebuilt boarding house, adjusting the silver star pinned to her vest. Territorial marshalate still seemed impossible, but the badge was real, as was the authority that came with it. Judge Aldrich had made the recommendation personally, citing her courage and dedication to justice. A knock at her door interrupted her preparations. "Come in." Kestrel entered, wearing his own badge, deputy territorial marshal, a position created specifically for him at Cordelia's request. His weathered face bore a mix of pride and nervous anticipation. "Ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as anyone can be for hunting monsters." She holstered her Colt .38, a gift from the territorial governor, along with her commission. "Any word from Temperance?" "Wire came in this morning. She's confirmed our suspicions about Cedar Falls. 3 more missing girls in the mayor's bin. Seen with some unsavory characters from back east." His expression darkened. "This thing is bigger than we thought, Cordelia. Much bigger. It spent the past weeks investigating, following trails of correspondence and financial records that painted a disturbing picture. Marcus Wickham hadn't been operating alone. He'd been part of a network that trafficked in human misery across multiple territories. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined, reaching into territorial governments and federal offices. Then, it's good we're not facing it alone. Judge Aldrich had used his connections to assemble an unprecedented task force, honest lawmen from across 3 territories. Backed by federal authority and supported by a growing network of brave women who refused to stay silent any longer. Temperance Whitmore had become their unofficial coordinator. Using her newspaper connections to expose the truth and rally support, Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway, beaming with maternal pride. "There's a crowd gathered outside, dear ones. The whole town wants to see you off properly." They walked downstairs together, and Cordelia's breath caught at the sight waiting for them. Main Street was packed with people, just from Millhaven, but from surrounding communities as well. Women and men, young and old, all gathered to show their support for what the papers were calling the Marshals' Crusade. Patience was there, healthy and smiling, working as Mrs. Abernathy's assistant now. Henrik the blacksmith had brought his whole family, including the daughter he'd failed to protect before, but who now stood tall and unashamed. Even former Sheriff Bramwell was present, having earned early release for his cooperation in exposing the wider conspiracy. "Miss Cordelia," a voice called from the crowd. It was Mary Hutchins, the woman who'd testified about her assault. "Bring those devils to justice. You hear all of them?" Cheer rose from the assembled crowd, and Cordelia felt tears prick her eyes. 6 months ago, these same people had been ready to see her hang. Now they were sending her off as their champion. Judge Aldrich stepped forward to address the crowd. "What we witnessed here in Millhaven was more than one woman's courage. It was the birth of a new kind of justice. Justice that protects the innocent and punishes the guilty, regardless of wealth or position." He turned to Cordelia and Kestrel. "You carry with you not just the authority of the law, but the hopes and prayers of every person who believes in doing what's right. Make us proud." As they mounted their horse Seza, a matched pair of sturdy roans donated by grateful citizens, Silas Wickham approached. The dead mayor's brother looked years older than he had just weeks before, but there was peace in his eyes that hadn't been there during his rage-filled pursuit of vengeance. "Marshal Ashworth," he said formally, then dropped his voice. "Cordelia, I want you to know what you did was right. It took me time to see it, but Marcus needed stopping. If there are others like him out there, stop them too." She nodded, accepting his forgiveness and offering her own in return. The crowd followed them to the edge of town, where Temperance waited with fresh supplies and the latest intelligence. As Millhaven faded behind them, Cordelia felt a sense of completion rather than loss. This town had made her who she was, first a victim, then a survivor, and finally a protector. So, Kestrel said as they rode toward Cedar Falls and whatever darkness waited there, any regrets about not choosing that quiet life? Cordelia considered the question seriously, watching the endless prairie stretch before them. Somewhere out there, frightened women were praying for rescue, and corrupt men were counting on their silence to protect them. The work would be dangerous, probably thankless, and certainly difficult. Not a single one, she said, and meant it. Besides, who says this isn't quiet? It's just you, me, and the open road. Kestrel laughed, the sound carrying across the grassland. Cordelia, my love, you have a unique definition of quiet. As they rode toward the sunset, their shadows stretching long behind them. Neither saw the lone figure watching from the hills a man in black who smiled coldly before wheeling his horse toward Cedar Falls, riding hard to warn his associates that the marshal was coming. The fight was far from over. But for the first time since that terrible day at the hanging tree, Cordelia felt truly alive. She'd found her purpose, her partner, and her calling. The drifter had indeed fought the hangman, and in saving her from the noose, had discovered that sometimes salvation came not from running away, but from turning to face the darkness together. In the distance, a church bell tolled the evening hour, its clear notes floating across the prairie like a benediction. Justice was coming to the territories. Carried by a woman who'd been pulled from death by love and transformed by truth into something the corrupt had never faced before, Marshal who couldn't be bought, intimidated, or silenced. The legend of Marshal Cordelia Ashworth was just beginning.